Okay, so a video about the paints that I use. There is no set paint that I use because they all have a purpose. For example, the one that I've been using the most lately is the Vallejo model color version. This is a wonderful line, but it is 17 mil, which they are tiny bottles compared to the usual craft paint that you can buy. The difference is that this is 50 cents at Walmart, and this is about $4.50. The reason this is more expensive is because this is higher pigment than this. This has like a chalky texture when you paint with it. So if I actually get some and I pour it out, they look about the same when you put them. See here. What you can't tell is, let's see here. Alright, let's get this brush. You can see how it cakes. If I can get this to focus. And it doesn't have much coverage. If you get the same paint, let me kind of clean this up a bit here. If I get the same, but in white, you see it has almost perfect coverage. And it's not as cakey. So this is more kind of flaky, the pigments are all over the place, and then you have the white, which is higher pigment and gets smoother coverage and doesn't cake and doesn't flake as much either. That's the difference between miniature paint and actual craft paint. Now there's a bunch of different miniature paints that you can use. There's the Vallejo line, there's the Army Painter, which is awesome for starters. If you are looking to get into the hobby, this is it, because these will come out to about half the price of the Vallejo paints. So these come out to, I think it's $2 a pot, and I think these are 15 mil? No, these are 18 mil, so it's one mil more than these. But this is also a little bit more watery. You have this kind of consistency to it, just a little bit thicker, a little bit better than your standard craft paint. So it tends to be cheaper. The nice thing about this line compared to the model color is that if you look at the front, it says it has a 100% match. Let me focus this with my phone here, to the color primer. These guys have multiple color primers in their line. You can buy the spray cans that will paint this color. Once you have your item primed, you can go back with this color and it will match the color 100%. So if you're worried about making mistakes and stuff like this, these guys are incredibly forgiving when it comes to correcting any mistakes. The biggest issue with these guys, you need to shake the paint because they break up really easily. I can show you an example right now. You see that's the color brown, and it's all different colors in it because it needs to be shaken. This is their oak brown, and look at that. It's just not looking so hot. These guys need to be shaken up really good. Some people put metal agitators on the paint. I should have some here, but it's basically little tiny stainless steel balls that go into the containers. There you go. That's these guys. They call them mixing balls. A pack like this will run about $7, and it brings 100. And I do not have 100 Army Painter paints there. I mean, as you can see, I bought this and I still have, there's about 50 still left in there. You can use them with other bottles. I personally stick one of those mixing balls in every one of these bottles, except these guys. These guys I only use for making terrain or stuff that I need to get a lot of coverage for cheap. I'm not gonna use one of these paints to paint, you know, a 3 foot by 3 foot board, because I'll be going through maybe 2-3 pots of this, and at $7 a pop, it's very expensive compared to this being 50 cents, and 2 of these will cover a whole board. So I could cover a whole board for $1, or I could cover a whole board for almost 14 bucks. So it's a huge difference when you throw in colors. The other thing is there's another lineup that's very popular. It's the Citadel lineup, which is this one right here, Citadel color. They do contrast paints, which are kind of clear, and when you go over it, you get an interesting effect. Let me see if I have okay, so let me see if he'll show it. If you look at the joint there with the black, you see that you can kind of see some blue, you can kind of see some highlights in that joint there right by his knee. That's actually the contrast paint. The paint will run into the recesses and focus more on coloring the recesses and less of the outside areas. So it gives a really interesting effect. So that's what you get with these, with this contrast paint. And then you have the shades, which is after you finish a model, you go over it with these kind of liquids. You do Agrax, they have Skeleton Horde, they have a bunch of different names for this, but it'll do different kinds of colors. Some will be brown, some will be black, and what it does is it tints the colors and the recesses. So it kind of mutes the color down, so you get a uniform color across the entire miniature. So if you look at the backpack here, those recesses, like the little holes that you see colored in, that's all because of that liquid. You pour that liquid all over the model, and then it slowly changes the color of the model, and it highlights all those dark areas, so it really comes out. You can see some on the shoulder edges there with the red and the blue. There's like a little line all around it. That's because of the shading. So that's all the wash. And then finally you have the base colors. Like these little pots are incredibly pigmented. They're the best out of all these paints. And these come out at $5.50 a little pot. And if you look at the size of the pot by comparison, they tend to be the smallest. So you do not use this paint for anything other than miniatures, unless you really want to waste your money. Do not use these. A couple of other honorable mentions are you should not focus on a specific brand of paint, because as long as it accomplishes what you're doing, you should be fine with what you have. For example, this is a green I can't get from any of these products. This is a kind of yellow green, really good for showcasing green weapons that I wouldn't need to mix by mixing, say, all these colors together with some white and maybe coming up with a different shade of green. It's just not the same. So it's better to go with an already mixed green, so you have it uniform across the entire I guess units or army that you're building. The other ones, you have the matte medium, which you use to mix your paint. This makes the paint a little bit thinner, so that it can cover without spending a lot. What this does is it also keeps it from drying really quickly, and it thins it out. You won't use this paint straight from the pot into whatever it is you're painting, you will always either mix it with water or you will put some medium on it. You need to mix it with something. So let me go ahead and prop this up here. Open up the medium, put some medium in it. The medium looks white, but it will actually dry clear. It is pretty much a retardant, so it keeps it from drying, and it helps dilute it so that it can go to the model or whatever it is you're painting easier. I mean, as you can see, as you mix it, it becomes softer and smoother, and this is what you would be painting with. So you could go ahead, spread it around, put it on the miniature, whatever it is you're doing, and it will actually take a little longer to dry than normal. But you see it now all of a sudden is a lot softer and leaves the streaks from the brush. I mean, this is an old brush that I have lying around. So the paint becomes a lot easier to work with, especially if you're using good detail brushes. The other one which I love using is distilled water. So I get this at Publix or anywhere. It's just water with no mineral content. So I put distilled water in these little dropper bottles, and then I just leave them in the rack. And then as I use it, I'll put a couple little drops of water into the paint, swoosh it around, and then I have it at a consistency that I like to use or paint with. You don't want to paint a miniature with a brush that when you look at the tip it's all dried up and chalky, because all of that will apply to the miniature and then you get this really weird effect. I'm gonna pause the video and see if I can find a miniature where that happened when I first started painting. Okay, so here we have what I'm talking about. This is one of the first couple miniatures that I painted. It came in a set from Zombicide. This is kind of my plastic of shame because I never did finish these. But you can see here, what you do is you prime them all black, and then you go over them with a white primer so that you get all the shadow effects on the model. And then what you do is you hit it with a paint light enough and kind of flaky enough that it shows the highlights and the shadows, so you don't need to work as hard when it comes to painting miniatures. So all these are primed and ready to go. I just never got around to taking care of them. The other ones here, as you can see, I use craft paints for these. They were not high pigment paints, but if I can get it to focus here, guess not. See if I can get this guy. Yeah, you can see the detail is not all that great. The paint's kind of just stuck to the model on the axe there. It just doesn't look that good. If you look at the shading and everything, it's kind of very stark, not as smooth. You could actually see it a lot more on this guy's biceps here. Let me get him. So if you look at his arm, you see these stark contrasts. Whoa. Yeah, this isn't gonna work. Sorry, phone sucks. Apologize. Yeah, this isn't gonna work. Guess I'll have to go for the bigger model and see. So one of the most important ones on him was his cape. If you look at his cape, it has no highlights, it has no shading. It was mostly done by just watering down black craft paint and kind of throwing it all over the model, and it just didn't come out looking good. You see more as the light catches it. But it's not all that great when you compare it to something like this, where if you look at his cloth, you have his cloth pieces here and they're all smooth, nicely shaded. You know, there's some distinction as to where the wrappers on the cloth are. You could see some of the fiber lining. You know, it's a big difference in comparison. You look at the steel and that arm gauntlet, and you can see it's kind of cakey. You can't really even focus on it because you know, the camera's struggling to pick it up. And then you compare steel similar to that, so you could see the high pigment and the smoothness of the paint makes a huge difference, especially when you compare it to other models. I mean, this is fur. It's supposed to be fur, and it doesn't even look all that great. So it's the paint and the consistency of the paint really does matter. Now, things where craft paint excels at, example is here. This is actually the first miniature in my entire life that I painted right here, and I did them with craft paints as well. The same craft paints that you saw me paint these miniatures, I used it on this. As you can see, it looks a lot better on terrain than it does actual miniatures because the scale is a lot larger. It's not as detailed, it doesn't need to be, and usually stuff like this gets overlooked. But overall, it looks a lot better than that stuff right there. It's kind of shameful, but it's nice to look at, and when you compare it to how good you progress over time and you go from something like this to something like that, it's really something to look at, especially when you think about, you know, these I didn't even put a base on them, I just painted the base black. And then we move on to something like this where the base has, you know, skulls on it, it has texture, it even has grass on it. You know, it's a big difference. Little details like that make something look so much better in the long run. The other thing about these paints that's really important is, like I said, shaking them earlier with the metal balls and the agitators, as they're called. Like this is broken up. If you look at it, you can see some of the green on the paint. If I were to pour this out and paint with it, it would be absolutely devastating. So I invested in this. It's a shaker. It's a nail shaker. Usually you see these in salons. But basically you just strap the paint on it, press the button, and it starts shaking. You know, the neighbors think that you're playing with a vibrator, but it's okay. But you leave it there for a minute, and next thing you know, this is no longer green like that. It's actually a consistency where you can pour it out and paint. It beats having to sit here for a minute and just shake, 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 and then you're looking at the TV and trying to figure out what the hell you did wrong in your life, and you're still here shaking, 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 when this could do it for you, and you could keep painting, and then by the time you finish painting whatever it is you're doing, this has done or finished shaking your paint, and now you have your paint ready to go. The other thing is a wet palette, and that is the most important thing when it comes to painting stuff like this. You can make it with any old Tupperware. You know, this is mine right here, good old Betty Crocker. You put paint in there and it keeps it moist. Actually, if you can see, the paint is still wet, it's still usable. It's a little bit broken up because it's been there for about 3 or 4 days now that I haven't painted. So this paint is actually garbage, I wouldn't use it, but it will hold your paint wet and it will not dry for a good couple days. So unless you're the slowest painter in the world, you should finish your project way before this even becomes an issue. What this is parchment paper that you get at the dollar store or anywhere else. They use it to bake. So it's just thin paper that can absorb water without soaking water. And then underneath is just a paper towel, wet. You're soaked. You put the paper towel down, you put the parchment paper on top, and you can put the ink on the paper. It will not get over soaked or anything like that. It'll just keep it moist enough so that it won't dry. You just take a little bit of water, you thin your paint, you know, you take it, you can paint with it, and you're good to go. If you want to paint tomorrow, you don't get to waste paint. You just cover this up and bam, just leave it there. It'll be good for tomorrow. You won't have any issues. So that covers just about everything. Brushes is a whole different monster. I recently bought these and I love these Kolinsky Sable detail brushes. Absolutely incredible, and I highly recommend them. They came, I think, at 25 bucks for a pack of 10. The one I recommend the most is the number 2 brush. This is the number 3. but they are great. The number 2 is just perfect. It's kind of like a nice middle ground between being too thin or too thick, so you get a nice coverage between both. But it works, and they work incredibly well. Here you go. Here's the number 2. This is about the average thickness that I'm using to paint. You can see on the miniature there, it looks like it would just be blotting it out, but it's actually the point on it is really great and works really well. And the other thing that I use is just a plain old bottle. It has some sand in it to keep it weighted so I can hold it in my hand and not struggle. This is just some sticky tack used to hold posters and stuff like that. A lot of school teachers and stuff use this to put paperwork and stuff on the walls. And you just get your miniature and stick it on there. The tack will hold it, and then you can just move it around without having your fingers touching the miniature, and you're able to handle it. If you need to put it down for whatever reason, you need to stop painting, you just drop it down, you're good to go. You can have multiple of these bottles and go from one to the next to the next. The other thing is maintenance, and it's the last thing I'll cover, which is soap, brush soap. You got to keep your brushes clean. This thing is amazing. It is the, if I can get it to focus, please, Masters Brush Cleaner. This came out at about $4 in Amazon. Easy delivery. What it is, it's a thick soap. Put this down. It's a nice thick soap. You just get your brush, swish it in the soap, clean it off, swish it in the soap, clean it off, and then you can actually leave this on the brush while it dries, and it will keep its shape. So you shape your brush to a nice point, you leave it there to dry. Always put your brushes upside down to dry. Always. If you need to magnetize them or put some clips on them to hold them up, do so. What happens is when you wet the brush and you put it to dry, and you put it in a cup like this is a big no-no with a wet brush. What happens is the water goes down into the metal cap, touches the wood rottens, and then all of a sudden it falls off and breaks, or it becomes useless, and you've officially ruined your brush. So do not ever let your brushes dry like this. Always put them upside down to dry. Once they've dried, you can go ahead and put them in a cup, no problem. Obviously the water won't be an issue anymore. Anywho, that just about covers everything. I hope this helped you guys out, and sorry for anything I said that didn't make any sense. This was just rushed and put out for those of you that wanted the info. So good luck.